Hello, everybody, and welcome to my first real video. Today, we're going to be talking about the Netflix documentary, Trust Me, The False Prophet. Basically, it's about an offshoot of FLDS, which is the Fundamentalist Latter-day Saints, who itself is an offshoot of mainstream Latter-day Saints, also known as Mormonism. And I really was trying to figure out exactly where I was going to go with the first video because there's so much involved. I couldn't possibly do it in one video. It probably would have taken me all day to explain. So we're going to do this in parts. And what I had decided is we are going to start off the discussion, give you a little background in the FLDS and a little bit of a background in Mormonism. I am not an expert in any of these, but I have done a lot of research over the years. I have been very interested in cults, theology, different religions in general. So anytime that I'm interested in something, I will research it. So a lot of this is in my head already. I did do a little follow-up research on the documentary and some of the survivors of this cult and that have come forward to speak to different people, along with Dr. Christine Marie, who I cannot say nothing but amazing things about her. She pretty much helped bring this horrible cult leader down. His name is Samuel Bateman, and he basically is a pretty big monster. He took on child brides. He did a whole bunch of grooming, manipulation, basically took women who were groomed already by the FLDS and made himself the new prophet, lied to them and told them that their current prophet, who is currently in jail or prison for the rest of his life, pretty much, Warren Jeffs, explained that he had passed away. There's some conspiracy theory that he's not still alive. There's, a mannequin in his cell, or, it's AI, but, Warren Jeffs is still very alive and well to this day, kind of pedaling around prison, doing whatever, still officially the prophet of the FLDS, which I will explain more in detail as we go because there's so much to it. And I will do my best to get into all the things for you. And again, this is my first official video. So if I squirrel, if the quality isn't great, I apologize. This is brand new to me, but I cannot wait to share these stories with you. Storytelling is one of my most favorite things to do. So why don't we get into it? Okay. So I did take some notes, and honestly, I do a lot better, even though sometimes I'm a little unorganized. I do a lot better just speaking. Again, I love storytelling. I love just discussing these kinds of topics with everybody. So we'll get into what LDS is. LDS is known as Mormonism, and it was started by Joseph Smith in the 1800s. And Joseph Smith was a controversial character of his time, as many religious leaders are. There's that joke out there that all religions start out as a cult. Whether you believe that or not, a lot of people just kind of laugh about it. But in a lot of ways, that is very true. And Joseph Smith was looking to make a name for himself. He was a salesman, and I believe he sold rocks. He's a rock, digger, salesman. And he would do things to impress people. Like he would tell the future by looking in his hat. He had a hat. He would look in it and he would put things in it. And apparently these items would tell the future. I know, very interesting. I guess, what do you want for the 1800s? You got to be, they didn't have technology. You got to be inventive, right? So, long story short, he grew his following and, had this big elaborate story. And of course, Mormons believe this. No shade on Mormons. Anybody who is part of a religion, that is their beliefs, and I completely support it, as long as they don't hurt people, because that's where these documentaries usually take a dark turn. But he grew his following. There's lots of controversy. A lot of people disliked them. They brought the polygamy aspect into religions, which honestly goes back probably thousands and thousands of years. But they brought it to more of a modern time. And they ended up denouncing polygamy because polygamy became, which is plural marriages. Okay, let me explain. Polygamy is like a religion-based multiple spouses, which in most religions, it's usually a male who has multiple females that they're married to. And in modern day, it is illegal overall. I think there's some areas where it might be accepted and not, criminally brought forth, but most of the US, it's completely illegal. And it's called bigamy when you have more than one spouse. So you're legally married to more than one spouse, which I'm not really sure how that would even get through to begin with, with technology and databases, but moving on. So Joseph Smith, he was murdered essentially and during like some kind of big riot, and Brigham Young came in, which might be recognizable because there's the Brigham Young universities, which are the LDS based universities. Most people that go there are in fact Latter-day Saints. And Brigham Young, he also had multiple wives. Joseph Smith had multiple wives. Brigham Young had multiple wives. Most of the men in the Latter-day Saints were expected to have a plural marriage. And, like I said, it was kind of unfair to the ladies, but they were indoctrinated in this scripture where it was accepted. They were, indoctrinated their whole lives. They were born into it. They converted to it. And it was just something that they just dealt with because they loved the religion. They loved God. They loved whichever, religious figures were part of this religion that they were following. And they kind of just accepted it. I mean, in modern day, unfortunately, I don't see that being as much of a case, but that is when you come to the fundamentalist Latter-day Saints. So they began in, I think, the early 1900s, right? Because there was a group that wanted to go back to the fundamentals of Mormonism, of LDS. They wanted to, we want to do these things that Joseph Smith originally taught us. We want to go back to the very traditional gender roles. I mean, LDS has pretty traditional gender roles. Men do very, masculine things. Women stay home and usually take care of the children. A lot of them, modern day, they do work. They do have careers. They take care of the families. But, in the FLDS, it was very, very specific. The women had to dress extremely modestly. They wore what are called prairie dresses, basically up to the neck, the button up to the neck, the long down to the ankles. You don't show anything, long sleeves. You don't show any skin, very modest. And they do have very long hair. It's usually styled very pretty, braids and all the things because their religion says women are not allowed to cut their hair. And I believe, I could be wrong. Like I said, I'm not an expert, but I believe their belief system is that when they pass away and, meet their spouse in the afterlife, the women use their long hair to wash their husband's feet. Like I said, I heard that, maybe, a little off, but the modern day mainstream LDS, you don't see the women with the extremely long hair these days. So, a few religions are like that. And if that's what they believe, good for them. And I am always one to preach, like, I don't care what you believe. I don't care what you practice, as long as those beliefs and those practices do not hurt other people. You don't break, moral laws. You don't break, federal, state laws. You don't hurt people, animals, kids, elderly, anybody. I don't care if you worship a rock. If you love that rock and you think that rock is your savior, go for it. As long as you don't hurt people. That is a great rule of thumb as far as I'm concerned. I don't judge, and I respect everybody. I respect, even though I don't agree with things, I still respect people's beliefs. And in my opinion, that's how it should be. Like, everybody's going to feel how they feel about their belief system. And if that brings them comfort for their soul, more power to them, right? Anyway, moving on. So FLDS, like I said, they're very traditional, very fundamental to the Mormon beliefs. And there have been a few prophets. The main ones that I know of is Rulon Jeffs and Warren Jeffs. Warren Jeffs is still currently the prophet. He is serving the rest of his life in prison. He was arrested in 2006 for breaking all kinds of laws, one of the main ones being assault on young women that were underage. And I'm not talking about smacking them around. I know where I'm putting this on YouTube, but you can use your imagination. Anybody who knows anything about this stuff, what kind of assault it was, right? So, and that's what he is doing. He was running from the law. He was doing all kinds of shady things, and he got caught for it, thankfully, because he was hurting people, hurting children, hurting men and women and elderly and all the things, So he was brought to justice, thankfully. But his followers still believe he is the prophet because he's not deceased yet. If he were deceased, he would be, the next prophet would take over, and I'm not really sure on the way that works, but it's a system that they figure out, once their prophet passes away. And who was before him was Rulon Jeffs, which was Warren's father. And, Rulon was elderly when he passed away, and, he was very sick for a while and was still taking on wives. And I mean, it was a whole mess, but, these men had dozens and dozens of wives. I'm not even sure. I know there's a number out there, but it was a crazy amount. And I know it's like makes them holier, but in my opinion, it's just about power and status. And I'm a religious leader. I need to have this, I need to have all these wives and all these children and all this money and all the things, even though, a lot of times religion is more about charity than it is about profit. But we know that as time goes on, people get greedy. We're only human, natural human, one of those natural human flaws is greed. We see money and we get dollar signs in our eyes. When we get money, comes power, comes status, all the things. It's just a snowball effect at times. So Rulon was very sick, and Warren basically took over for him while he was sick. Like, he may have been unconscious, but Warren would say, "My father is speaking through me." And, everybody be like, "Oh, the prophet's speaking through his son. Oh my God." And when Rulon passed away, Warren took over, of course, because Warren he already had his foot in the door, basically. There was no way that, he felt that I have to be the prophet. My dad's the prophet. He spoke through me when he was sick. So basically, Warren took on all of his dad's wives, took on more wives, and it's like more. And it's wild. It's very wild to me, but like, it's just their way of life. And unfortunately, a lot of those lines were blurred. Having multiple partners and calling them spouses is not illegal. The legality comes in when you try to make it official through, filing the paperwork. But you can have as many spouses, spiritual spouses, as you want, and as many children. Like, even per this documentary that I'm going to be going over, the law doesn't see it as a problem to even have an underage wife, to call an underage girl your wife, because you're not legally married to them, and calling them your wife is okay. as long as you're not doing anything, risque with them. And that's a very, very light term. Again, we're on YouTube. I have to kind of monitor myself. I know a little bit about the terms of service, but it's not illegal to call somebody your wife, even if they're underage, as long as you're not assaulting them. We're going to get into that later. There's this officer that, oh my God, he wasn't doing jack about the whole situation, even though it was brought up to him, and he was too much of a softie. We'll get into that. But, Warren Jeffs took on all these wives. He, kept going and going and, doing things that he shouldn't have been doing, dealing with illegal dealings, assaulting young underage girls, and got busted. And then fast forward, him being in prison. So when he got in prison, he was still preaching through his jail cell, right? He was still giving like revelations and directions for his followers. And as I stated before, FLDS is very traditional, in the aspect of the whole, you have to have lots of children to repopulate our religion. Basically, they're in a few small communities for the most part. I'm sure there's others around the country, but for the most part, they're centered in areas in like Utah and Arizona. Like there's this town on the border that's talked about. A lot of this takes place in the documentary. There's Short Creek, which is in Utah, and there's Colorado City, which is in Arizona. And a lot of this is because having two different states make up your community and you're right on the border, sometimes you can kind of skirt the law that way. But most of their community is centered there. And, Warren Jeffs had some stuff going on in Texas and other parts of the country, mostly in the South, like the Southwest. But for the most part, they're centered there. And so he would preach to his people and give direction. And, when he was arrested, when he was, brought to justice, he told them that there will be no marriages and no children, and you cannot copulate with your spouse. You cannot sleep with your spouse. No baby making, basically, which, no marriages, no baby making. And that brought them very, they're shocked because it was one of their, basically their rules, their laws of the land, that there should be a new child every year. There should be a new birth every year. I think the way the lady in the documentary explained it, not a year should go by without a child. And that's not like in the community, that's in a family. Basically, like women were expected to have children pretty much every year. They were baby makers, they were home caretakers, took care of their man. I shouldn't say men because it was only the men who had multiple wives. But, for the most part, a lot of these people, a lot of these men, not all of them had, dozens and dozens of wives. That was considered very prestigious for like the holiest men there, because a lot of the holiest men were taking the wives of these, less, religious, less high status men. They'd be like, oh, she looks good, I want her to have my babies, I'm gonna take her. And since they weren't legally married, they really couldn't do anything. And even if they were, they would figure out a way around it, of course. What woman doesn't want to be married to the prophet? And that's what a lot of the women say. Like even some still today who are still married to Warren Jeffs, they're like, what woman? I want to be the prophet's wife. Like that's the highest of high status as a woman, because, women are considered second class. Your status is based on who you're married to, and being married to the prophet is like the best of the best, even though, it's kind of a crapshoot. You got all these other women that he's hooking up with. You might see him once in a while, which I guess with Warren Jeffs, that was probably for the best. You only saw him here and there, he's got all these other women to handle. And I know it sounds bad, but yeah. But it's like, it was more or less, so much of it was about status. And, the more wives you had, the higher your status was. And so he didn't want anybody to be married, making babies. And in the documentary, they showed an entire like attic, like storage area full of cribs because people were like, well, I can't have babies. I'm done with my crib. Little Junior is 2 years old now. They don't sleep in a crib anymore. I'm going to put this in storage. And it was just unheard of. It was a very sad time for them and a confusing time. They were very indoctrinated in this religion and, what they felt was a religion. And they were just like, oh my God, we're supposed to be going at it like rabbits. We're supposed to be, the men are like, we're supposed to be having all these wives and I can't have any more wives. I can't make any more babies. Good Lord. It was tough for them to handle. And they were questioning a lot, but they followed their prophet. They were just going along with what they knew. You never question the prophet. You never question the man in general. You don't question the man. Don't question my husband. He is my leader. The prophet's even above him. So if he says, no baby making, ain't going to do it. And so they just went on with their lives. And then, Sam Bateman pops up and probably, I'll pull up some pictures at some point of this man. And I'm looking at him and one thing I want to put out there is I don't understand how these cult leaders, especially the male ones, you don't hear about many female cult leaders, but the male ones, why are they so frumpy? Like they look like the kid on the playground who I was the girl on the playground that got picked last for gym class or, kickball or what have you. Like I was that weird girl on the playground that, I got picked on and nobody wanted me on their team because I wasn't very athletic, maybe I was a little pudgy, whatever. But this dude looks like, he looks like a twerp. It's like a dweeb. Like he's kind of chunky, which no shade, I'm chunky too. I don't mind chunky guy, but how did you get these people to follow you? And I think the answer is he already knew that they were indoctrinated in this. He knew they were frustrated because they wanted, like these young women wanted to get married. They wanted to be moms because that's all they knew. That's all their culture and their upbringing taught them. That's their purpose in life, is to be the mom, the wife, the homemaker. And they weren't getting that. So Sam Bateman comes along and he starts, making himself maybe sound good, giving them some scripture, just rattling off some teachings and making some up on his own. And that sounded good to them. Like, oh, this man can save me. And the thing about Sam Bateman is he was a divorced man, and divorce is not, it's not illegal or completely against FLDS. There's circumstances where people can get divorced. It's not unheard of. But he was divorced, and, there's some follow-up content that I listened to where Sam Bateman, his wife divorced him because he wanted to basically make one of his daughters his wife. So one of his underage daughters, and his wife like, no, we are not doing that. And I'm going to leave you. Okay. And, another thing is like, he's a very awkward person. Like he was dopey, he's still alive. He's in prison, thankfully, but he's dopey and frumpy and derpy and all the things. Like, how do you become a cult leader? How do you I get it, use your words, use your, I don't know if he had any charm, but to them, maybe he had charm, if he said the right things. We've all been there, we've all had our share of, like, how did I fall for that person? But, he was the highest up to them. And, little side note here, Like how do these frumpy guys have cults? Like, look at, like, if you know anything, like if you've done any research like I have over the years, or heard of, like, NXIVM with Keith Raniere. He, that was a pretty big one because he had, a couple, like, maybe B-list-ish celebrities, like Ally Mack. I think she was on that Superman show, but she had a little bit of fame. But he got these people, but he was a derpy guy. And you got people like Marshall Applewhite from Heaven's Gate, the guy with the eyes. He looked like a Q-tip with eyes, basically. He got people to follow them, like Jim Jones. Like, he wasn't a bad looking guy. He said all the right things, but he wasn't, like, why don't we see any really attractive cult leaders? It's weird to me. But I guess, these people are looking for purpose, and the person that is leading them gives them purpose. And it's like I always say, from the research I've done, dumb people, you don't have to be dumb to fall for this stuff. There's a lot of really intelligent people who, like, end up joining cults. Like Jim Jones, for example, had lawyers and law enforcement, people who were intelligent. A lot of people, like, he had a lot of, less fortunate people that were living in poverty, but he also had a lot of higher ups that were very intelligent, successful people. But it's like a whole lot of it is, you don't have to be dumb. You just have to be looking for purpose, to me. There's a lot of people that are in really rough spots in their lives, whether it's they just got a divorce, they lost somebody they love, they're questioning their religion, they're questioning their purpose in life, they're questioning, who they really want to be. And then you've got somebody preaching, making this stuff sound amazing. They're not going to be like, well, that stuff sucks. You're probably going to get hurt. You're probably going to be drained of all your money. You're probably going to, like, you might even die. You know what I mean? You might, look at Jonestown, 900, almost 1,000 people passed away, from their Jim Jones is killing them, basically. Some of them took, you hear don't drink the Kool-Aid. Well, it was grape Flavor-Aid with a pound of cyanide in it. And some of them took it willingly. A lot of people, it was forced upon. But almost 1,000 people lost their lives because of this man. So, none of them joined because they knew, oh my God, so many years from now, I'm going to be involved in this huge tragedy in Guyana, South America, and living on this compound, being treated like garbage. And no, nobody does that. Nobody's like, oh, I need a challenge. No, I'm looking for purpose. I need answers. I need community. So it's like, that's why I don't judge anybody that is going through this stuff, who's been through this stuff, because they're not stupid. It might be misdirected, misguided, making, last minute decisions, making junk decisions, but they're not stupid. And a lot of them are very good, good-hearted people that just want something to believe in. Just like any religion, really. People that are brought up Christian, Jewish, Muslim, Hindu, they're looking for their purpose and they believe they found it, and that's amazing. Whatever helps your soul, but unfortunately with some of this, well, your soul is going to the other side way earlier than you want it to. Expect it to, maybe. I don't know. But anyway, just my little side rant about that. So, so just don't ever judge people who have had these experiences. Don't judge people who are in these experiences. What Dr. Christine Marie did, which we will talk more about, she thought these people needed help, and some of them absolutely did. Some of them did not. Some of them are living completely happy lives, no abuse, no illegal things happening. They're just happy. they found their purpose. They're living the life that they feel will bring them closest to God. And that's amazing for them. That's all you can ever hope for in life, is to find your soul's purpose and to be happy and live the life that makes you the happiest. So I scrolled off, but I'm going to do that from time to time, It's just who I am, because it's like, how when you get you're talking about a topic and then 30 other offshoots of said topic jump in your head. Yeah, that happens. I just have to be better at navigating back to the original topic. But hey, sometimes it's fun to go on these journeys. Like when I have friends who can keep up with me, just like, I'm very impressed. Good job. You can keep up with me. You can kind of connect the dots back to where we started out. So that brings me to the documentary. So the beginning of the documentary, again, it is called Trust Me, the False Prophet, and it's on Netflix. And a little bit of a backstory, how I came across Dr. Christine Marie. I was working a job. I was a pharmacy tech, and I worked for long-term care, which meant my job did not involve any direct patient care, did not involve taking phone calls. So I would listen, I put my earbuds in, and I would listen to podcasts all day, just any topic that I was interested in, true crime, paranormal stuff that we're going to cover here. But I would listen to like Audible books, listen like the books that I read to you. And I would listen to podcasts and YouTube videos, whatever I felt like that day. And I came across this podcast called Trust Me. And it is actually still going. They still drop episodes. I'll put the link in the description, just like I will put the links for everything I reference in the description. It's run by a girl named Lola Blanc and one of her friends, which I have to look up. And it was all audio for me. I was Spotify, and I was like, oh, sounds good. They speak about culty stuff. They talk about smaller cults that you may not be aware about. They talk about cults that everybody knows about, and the reason why Lola liked this, this topic, because her mom, who is Dr. Christine Marie, basically the star of the entire documentary, she was LDS at one point, mainstream, and then she got pulled into a very cult situation. It was very similar to Sam Bateman. The man told her that he was a prophet. He was, closest thing to God that she will ever find ever on this earth. And she was abused. She went through some horrific things that I'm not going to get too deeply into, but her experiences inspired her daughter, of course, because most girls are just crazy about their moms. There's some exceptions, but for the most part, we aspire and adore our moms. And so she did this podcast, of course. She does her own research, and she does it with her podcast partner. And Lola had Christine Marie on her podcast a handful of times, at least the ones I listened to. And I loved listening to Christine's story because it was so inspiring how she went through these horrific, abusive situations, but she pulled herself out. She worked on her healing. She actually ended up getting a degree in cult psychology, which is amazing to me. That is almost my dream. I'm going into forensic psychology. I'm in school right now, and working, somewhat with cults would be fascinating to me. Some kind of research, what have you, working with people who were in cults, or, people who ran cults, people who were higher ups in cults, just to learn the psychology behind it, because that is one of my biggest interests when it comes to true crime. And she has her degree in that, and she has a doctorate in psychology as well. She's a very intelligent woman and a very empathetic and just a ginormous heart. It's just, she wants to help people. She loves to help people. And that was her purpose, her and her husband's purpose for going to live in Short Creek. And that is the epicenter of the FLDS. And her husband, Toga, who is a very supportive, loving spouse to her, a lot of his work he could do remotely. And he, did a lot of filming. I can't remember his exact job title, but he did a lot of in the entertainment industry, as far as he did, documentaries and stuff. And she's like, these women, they need help, because she saw herself in them. She was like, oh my God, they're going through these horrific things. And, come to find out, some of them were. And as I said before, some of them weren't. Some of them were just happy, living their FLDS life, doing their thing. But, she came across Sam Bateman, his wives, and she learned about that. And she suspected there was some underage assault and abuse going on with some of the younger girls that were part of this offshoot. And, she's like, I have to, infiltrate this, and I have to record, I have to document. And her husband, being, having a lot of experience with filming, he's like, all right, let's do it. We'll do the filming. We will make him feel like he's a star, and he's just going to want to spill his guts out to us, which he did. Like, there is no doubt that they fed his ego, and he spilled everything to them, which is funny, because one of my favorite things is when these people that do horrible things, their egos are just so big, they just tell on themselves, because it makes it easier to convict them. Of course, there's always going to be an investigation, but when these people spill their guts and they're like, oh, I did this for this reason, of course they justify all the nasty things they do, but they just basically are proud of that. They're proud of getting away with it. It's the thrill, it's the ego, it's all the things. Most of them are narcissistic. Most of them are, egotistical, have a grandiose sense of self, and they're proud of their nasty deeds. If you made it with me this far, despite all the squirreling and the jumping back and forth and the sidetracking and the sidebars, congrats. I appreciate you very much as well. I am new at this, and I'm very excited to be sharing my thoughts and opinions and my knowledge with you that, a lot of times I think is useless. But when I put it to, educating other people, I think it's a great thing to share. And those of you who are into true crime, I'm glad you're here. And everybody else, true crime, whatever community you're part of, thanks for being here. I really appreciate you for watching this. And I'm going to wrap it up, because I think this is a good place to stop at the moment. And I will continue on at a later time. I'm not sure exactly when I'm going to drop the video. I could drop it right after I drop this one, but I have to learn editing. I know it's probably going to be rough until I get the hang of things here. And that's okay. It's a learning curve for everybody. I'm going to be putting some links in the description to the Trust Me podcast, and also the Cult of Consciousness on YouTube, which is kind of a podcast too. She does audio and videos as well. So I'll be linking that, and I will see you next time. Thank you so much. Do me a favor, like the video, subscribe to my channel, hit that notification bell so you know when I pop up. I'm going to be doing some live streams in the future. I may do the next part to this as a live stream. I haven't decided yet. But, hopefully as I go on, I will become less squirrely, more organized, less jumpy around. But we're going to do our best. And please, if your heart compels you to, share this with somebody you like. If you like my voice, if you like my face, if you like the topics, share away. I would love that. Like my channel, like the video, all the things. I appreciate you all. Thank you so much for joining me on part 1 of this journey.